Yes, hello to you all again, and another hearty welcome back to the latest episode of Classic Dirt Bike TV, where we continue to discover more of those old school vintage race bikes from way back in the day. Now, in this latest episode of CDB TV, I was going to feature that hybrid Honda Berg, but unfortunately at this moment in time I'm still putting that particular feature together, so we will post it on a future episode here on my channel. But until then, we're going to take a look at another iconic race bike from the 1970s, and when these machines were released in the late 1970s, they sold in huge numbers across the globe. So without any further garbage chat from me, let's jump straight into the video and take a look at this very nice 1977 Honda CR125 Elsinore. Now, our particular featured little Honda CR125 here is not a fully original bike from 1977, but nevertheless it's still a very nice example of one of these iconic little race bikes from that late 1970s era. Now, at the time I took these video clips and photos of the bike, it belonged to Andrew Craig from Stirling in Scotland, although since then I'm pretty sure that Andrew's now moved the bike on to a new owner who's currently enjoying this bike as a classic race machine. Now, Andrew did tell me that when he first purchased this bike, he bought it from the Doc Wob Classic Bike Importers, who were selling this machine on behalf of a customer who had recently passed away. But it wasn't too long before the partly disassembled bike arrived at Andrew's house, sitting on top of a wooden pallet. But nevertheless, the bike was more or less all intact and basically undamaged, but there were a few little issues that Andrew saw straight away that were going to require some attention, although the bike still looked great, and the issues that he needed to address were nothing that he couldn't put right himself, and Andrew just couldn't wait to get his hands on his brand new purchase. Now, one of the first things that Andrew checked over was the bike's two-stroke motor. Now, Andrew said that everything here was in pretty good condition, and when he eventually got it fired up, it sounded really crisp, but he was also told that at one time some tuning work and porting had been done to the cylinder, but just to verify that particular statement, Andrew then lifted the barrel and head off the motor just to make sure that that was the case, and it certainly looked like there was some work had taken place, as the piston had had a brand new ring fitted and the barrel had also been rebored. But the downside here was that the barrel was now on its last oversized piston. Although in terms of their power and performance, despite the size of these engines, these compact little LC125 motors could certainly still pack a decent punch when it came to performance on the racetrack. And as we see here, a nice Japanese Mikuni carburetor was bolted on to that 125 cylinder just to keep the little Honda motor buzzing and supplied with all the fuel that it was going to need. Although I have to say, as 125 two-stroke motors go for a 1970s dirt bike, these 6-speed Elsinore motors were one of the very best in the small race bike class. But because this was a 125, you certainly had to keep the motor in its sweet spot, which was around the mid-range to top end, and as long as you were prepared to dance up and down on that gearbox, you could certainly make this bike hustle on tight and twisty racetracks. Although this superbly buzzy motor, coupled with what was a reasonably light chrome moly steel chassis, this was still a great off-road package. And when you consider that the full-up weight of this bike only tipped the scales at around the 195 pounds mark, it was still a great little off-road toy to throw around. Now, with regards the little Elsinore's front suspension units, now these had already been refurbished prior to Andrew buying the bike, and in their stock trim for 1977, these were maybe a bit on the soft side, even for such a very small 125, but they did give the rider decent feedback over the bumps, and I think the overall travel was limited to around 8 inches of movement. But just to help protect the black paintwork on this lower fork stanchions, Andrew then fixed this foam padding down each leg just to stop stones and other debris from damaging those delicate alloy surfaces. And so as we move to the back of the machine, now when Andrew first bought the Elsinore, he said it had a pair of Hagen shocks bolted onto the rear of the bike, which he could see straight away were just far too long for the bike. And in fact, Andrew told me that when he first sat on the bike, he said the seat compressed even more than the shocks did. So those were immediately removed, and then a pair of these correct length Falcon shocks were then refitted, which put the rear of the bike back to the correct height and put the damping at the back of the bike back to its factory settings. Now, when Andrew removed the old Hagen shocks, and just out of curiosity, Andrew then weighed one of the old Hagen units, and just one of the old Hagen shocks weighed more than both of these Falcon shocks put together. So that alone is another weight saving on what was already a feather light little motorcycle. And with a bit of further research, Andrew then discovered that those old Hagens were actually made for an old XT500 Yamaha road bike. Now, once again, as you've no doubt already gathered, this exhaust expansion chamber is not the bike's original pipe from 1977, and this is an upgraded unit from Dave Miller Concepts, which of course were all handmade and function much better than the Honda originals. But as you know, Dave Miller Concepts specialised in producing high quality replacement parts for all manner of off-road motorbikes through his Miller Mano race shop in the 1970s, and he continued to fabricate and build one-off parts at DMC during the 1980s and 1990s, although we sadly lost Dave's great skills in 2020 when he passed away. Although if you had any of those Miller Mano DMC products fitted to your bike back in the day, then you'll know exactly the quality of their construction. Now, once more, when Andrew first took possession of this bike, it came complete with a brand new old stock fuel tank, which is very rare for one of these older LCs, and Andrew had second thoughts about actually riding the bike and damaging that very precious fuel tank. So to keep the original tank in prime condition, Andrew then ordered a replica replacement plastic fuel cell from DC Plastics in the USA, which came complete with its fuel cap, petrol tap, and all of its associated mounting rubbers, which was just a simple bolt-on replacement for the 1977 original. Now, once again, the bike's original seat was really okay, but it didn't appear to have much in the way of padding or cushioning effect for Andrew's very small posterior, so he then ordered a replacement item from JK Racing in the UK, although unfortunately Andrew was still not happy with the fitment of that replacement cover, so he then sent the entire seat to a custom motorcycle seat upholsterer in the USA that he'd used before on some of his other bike builds, and he manufactured an almost identical Honda seat cover with the Honda logo silk screened on to the rear. Now, of course, for 1977 originally, these Honda 125 Elsies would have been fitted with a chrome moly steel swing arm at the rear as a standard fixing, but this again was then swapped for this much lighter X cross-up alloy replacement item that is made in California in the USA. And these custom-made items are again very high quality and almost certainly a very good upgrade over its steel equivalent. But as you can see here again, there are multiple mounting points for the rear shocks, so a certain amount of adjustment can be made to the bike's rear settings so that you can change the angle of the shock for all manner of different setups and race conditions. Although having said that, every time that Andrew did ride the bike, he said that he kept stalling it whenever he tried to move off, and naturally he just thought that there was something wrong with his hand and foot coordination that just wasn't quite right. But as it transpires, this alloy swing arm just wasn't straight and it was well out of alignment, and so this was then removed and placed onto a jig to be trued up, which then of course cured that particular problem. Now, at the bike's controls department, the handlebar grips, levers and cables are, as far as I'm aware, are all still the stock 1977 parts on this bike, which again is quite a rare find for a bike that's now heading for 45 years old, but you can see that they certainly look the real deal and period correct for that iconic 1970s era. But your clutch hand will certainly be kept very busy when you're dancing up and down on that 6-speed Elsinore gearbox. And again, your right wrist will also get a bit of a workout on this throttle gasser, just trying to keep that LC125 Honda motor singing in its sweet spot where this particular little engine does its best work. Now again, as far as I know, these are all the bike's original plastics from 1977, and the one good thing about these old dirt bikes and their plastic parts nowadays is that there are a few companies out there now that specialise in the restoration of these old bike plastics, and usually as long as they're not broken or damaged, then these kind of companies can bring back the original shiny patina that the bike had when it was new and for sale and sitting in the bike dealerships. Although whether these particular plastics have been refurbished or replaced, I'm not exactly sure. Now, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that these 1977 Honda CR125s got their name from the legendary Lake Elsinore Grand Prix dirt bike race that normally took place in and around the Lake Elsinore area in California in the USA, which I think at that time was usually held around November of each year, and it was a hugely popular event in the late 1960s and early 1970s when the likes of the great Steve McQueen would take part, and clips from that fantastic race meeting were used on Bruce Brown's epic film On Any Sunday, which I'm sure that you'll all have already seen a million times before. Although whether this example here's original or not, who really cares, because there are very few of these little Elsies going around nowadays still with all of their factory fixtures and fittings from that 1970s period. But for me, this is still a treat to see one that's not only nice to look at, but one that's actually still being ridden on a racetrack. Although certainly another piece of our past motocross history, and a bike that did and still does enjoy cult status among many off-roaders who raced these machines back in 1977. Well, I hope you enjoyed that brief walk around that lovely 1977 Honda CR125 Elsinore. Not a fully original bike, of course, from that year, but nonetheless a very nice example of one of those iconic Honda bikes from that particular period. Now, coming up in my next video posting here on my channel, we're going to take a look at a bike that I filmed quite a few years ago now, and this was such a unique construction on this BSA 475 Victor Matisse that it's certainly worth another look here on my channel. So when we return, we'll be taking a look at this lovely BSA that was put together by Paul Balsillie at Balco Motorcycles. So if you've not already subscribed to my channel, then I do hope you will do that very small thing in the weeks and months to come, in order that you don't miss out on any of these future machines that I post here on CDB TV. But until then, everybody, continue to enjoy racing your old vintage race bikes, but more importantly, of course, be safe while you're doing it, and I hope you'll all return here very soon to talk about more vintage iron white here on your #1 and favourite classic dirt bike TV channel.